Warm welcome, everyone. Wow, I see already over 100 participants, and that makes me very happy because this is a very important topic today. Um, we have decided to convene this session today on women peace builders at the center on how psychosocial awareness makes peace building both safer, more sustainable, and effective. Also, to celebrate this year's International Women's Day. But as we meet today, we do so in the shadow of ongoing and escalating violence in the Middle East. I think a lot of us are following the news every day. And what perhaps we're not reading in the news so much is the devastating consequences that this has for civilians and just the profound regional implications. And for me, that's a stark reminder of the urgency for peace building, but also the risks that are faced by those who courageously work for peace. Women peace builders in particular are really at the forefront of these efforts. They transform communities, they mediate conflicts, and they are drivers of change. But often in contexts where their engagement actually challenges power structures, and that also makes it dangerous. And this makes it even more critical that we place their well-being, protection, and resilience really at the center of our peacebuilding efforts, ensuring that their leadership can be exercised safely, sustainably, and effectively. This event will focus on how the application of what we call a psychosocial do no harm approach can make this engagement with women peace builders safer and more sustainable. For sure, it's anchored in the Women, Peace and Security Council Resolution 1325, in the sense that it's not only a question of protection, but that women are actually active agents of change. And the women that we work with here at Berghof are mediators, organizers, community leaders at every level of society, and that they shape peace processes both formally and informally. And I think when we talk about participation, it's not just a neutral inclusion measure, because in patriarchal societies or very insecure contexts, it's high exposure. It's a social and political act that shifts power relations, and it can trigger a backlash. And the thing is that this exposure can also come with significant psychosocial implications for women peace builders and for their ability to stay engaged. Because these initiatives, peace building, conflict transformation, are embedded in those very contexts in which these women work. And therefore, they inevitably influence those contexts, both in intended, but also sometimes in unintended ways. And the thing with unintended effects is that it can include not only shifts in community dynamics or power relations, but also significant psychosocial risks for the same women that are engaged in peace building. So if we place women peace builders at the center, rhetorically, we must also ensure that we place their well-being, their protection, and also duty of care at the center of programming decisions. And that's why a psychosocial do no harm lens is essential. Today, we have 4 amazing women to discuss this issue with us, Erica, Sarah, Agnes, and Esther. And we decided to convene today's panel to hear directly from them, women peace builders working at the intersection of mental health and psychosocial support, with examples from Cameroon, Colombia, Northern Ireland, and Myanmar. Not only for them to share their experiences, but also to inspire us. Really, really looking forward to this conversation. I will hand over to my colleague now, Stephanie, who will moderate today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for also already these inspiring, welcoming words. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone also from my side. I am Stephanie Gaumert, and I'm advisor for MHPSS and Peace at the Berghoff Foundation. And as Chris has mentioned, I will moderate today's event. So through today's session, we aim to deepen our understanding, first of all, of the roles and impact of women in peace processes nowadays. But at the same time, we'll explore the psychosocial and protection risk women peace builders face as a consequence of their work. And then, as Chris has already outlined, by applying a psychosocial do no harm lens, we will identify practical strategies to make engagement with women peace builders safer, more sustainable, and also more effective. And before starting our discussion, I would like to introduce you to our 4 panelists today, who are really impressive women leaders from different continents. And I'd like to introduce you to Erika Ramirez. Erika is from Colombia. She's a lawyer, peace builder, and women's rights advocate, and also a mother of a 10-year-old child. And she's currently the country coordinator of the international GIZ program, Feminism in Action for Structural Transformation. So welcome, Erika. And it is also my pleasure to introduce you to Esther Oman from Cameroon, who has founded Reach Out Cameroon. And Esther is also, just like Erika, an internationally respected peace builder and humanitarian activist with over 2 decades of advancing peace, gender equality, and community-centered development across Cameroon, but also across the broader African continent. And I would also like to express my very warm welcome to Agnes Mary. Agnes is from Myanmar and a counseling psychologist and the founder of Serenity Counseling and Mental Health Services. And Agnes is committed to strengthening mental health and psychosocial support in conflict-affected Myanmar, and her work focuses on women's healing and empowerment particularly. And last but not least, we are having here with us Sarah Cook. Sarah is originally from Northern Ireland, but she has been working across almost the entire globe as a conflict response specialist, mediator, and peacebuilding practitioner. And for us, also very interesting, recently she has published a very insightful research report on the psychosocial implications of peacebuilding for women mediators. Before starting into the discussion, let me also quickly mention that at the end of this session, we'll have approximately 15 minutes to address questions from the audience, and you can post your questions through the question answers function in the Zoom chat. Probably we won't be able to answer all the questions, but at least some, and we'll try to cluster the questions so that we can get a more or less complete picture. And please note that today's event will be recorded. And having said all this, I'm really excited to begin today's discussion with the first question. So as Chris beforehand has already mentioned, since the landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325, the international community has formally recognized women as active agents in peace processes and in security mechanisms, which significantly broadened their role beyond the imperative of their protection from gender-based violence. So this is basically a shift from a victim focus towards a agency focus. And Erika, I would like to ask you now, from your Colombian, but also from your perspective, from your work in Africa and the Middle East, how would you characterize the roles that women take on in peace processes nowadays, both formally and informally?
Perfect, Stephanie. Okay, based on my experience, there are 3 rules that women normally navigate throughout peace building processes. One is combatants. In armed groups, women experienced forms of participation or decision making not available for civilian women. Returning to civil society, often characterized by rigid gender rules and high levels of gender-based violence, these women may face pressure to conform to traditional expectations centering on domesticity and dependency. In Colombia, women as combatants have promoted community-based care system in reintegration space. These initiatives seeks to redistribute unpaid care work and create collective solutions that allow women to participate economically and politically. Second role is victims and survivors of sexual violence. Conflicts intensify pre-existing gender-based violence. Sexual violence is often used strategically by armed actors, but it is also rooted in structural discrimination that precedes and outlives the conflict. Women and girls experience violence not only as isolated act, but as a part of a broader system of inequality. From a do no harm perspective, attention to victims must avoid revictimization. And the three rule, in my point of view, is human rights defenders. In Colombia, women organizations play a decisive role advocating for a peace agreement with a strong gender approach. They ensure that the differentiated impact of conflict on women is recognized and the concrete measures addressing gender-based violence, land rights, political participations, and reparations were included. From the do no harm perspective and also from the psychosocial perspective, supporting women's movements strengthens local capacities for peace. These movements often function as connectors within divided societies. They build bridges across political, ethnic, and territory lines. And this is my perspective about this question, Steffi.
Okay, thank you very much, Erika. Esther, may I ask you, maybe you can build on this and complement your perspectives from the African continent and maybe particularly Cameroon. And also, I would be interested in, like, according to your perspective, what difference does women's participation make in shaping peace processes and maybe also in transforming societies in a more sustainable way?
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I wish to say that I am bringing the voices and greetings of women from the grassroots to you this afternoon. Those women whose participation changed peace from an agreement between the elites, which we have in our communities, into a process rooted in community daily life. For example, in Cameroon's Northwest and Southwest, where we have the Anglophone crisis, long before formal actors could engage, women were already negotiating access to schools, safe corridors, humanitarian aid, and preventing retaliatory violence within the communities. They were going to the officials in the capital city to have a sit-down talk with them on the issues which they see and how they see violence escalating within their communities. And through the women mediators whom we train, we supported these women at the front line, and later on they were the ones who were going to the bushes to bring out their children and then talk to them to vacate those spaces in order to allow them to access their farmlands and to allow the children to access the classrooms. So I would say they were at times at the front line of crossfire, but armed actors respected them for the voices which they carry as mothers of humanity. And this made us to understand that when women meaningfully involve, the priorities expand. Peace discussions move beyond power sharing to livelihood, trauma healing, reintegration, education, and social cohesion. For example, in our National Women's Peace Convention, women insisted that peace must include, for example, economic recovery and dignity, not just ceasefire language. Women also influence the culture of dialogue. They tend to build bridges, as my sister Erika just said a while ago. They tend to build bridges across ethnic, political, and religious divides. I have seen women who lost their family members sit to dialogue, with the opponents in order to advocate for a non-retaliation. The moral authority changes the tone. And globally, we know that peace agreements are more durable when women participate. So beyond data, the real difference is this: women anchor peace in their daily life. They connect policy to people. So women's participation is not just what we call symbolic inclusion. It reshapes priorities, reduces revenge cycles, and strengthens the social fabric that makes peace sustainable. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Esther, and thank you, Erika, as well for these insightful remarks. So what we learn from is this, that we can't only reduce women's roles in peace process to just one role, but as Erika mentioned, they function as combatants returning back to civil society. We are dealing with victims and survivors of sexual violence and are also engaging with human rights defenders. And as Esther has mentioned, it is highly important to engage with these women to make peace processes more durable and more holistic, also by including perspectives on livelihoods, on social cohesion and dignity. So while women can contribute significantly to peace process and also to larger societal transformation, as we pointed out at the beginning, engaging in conflict-affected environments and navigating power structures and challenging entrenched norms, especially in patriarchal systems, can also have complex personal and psychosocial implications for these women. And so the next question I would like to dedicate to Agnes and also to Sarah. From your experience and observation, what would you say are these psychosocial impacts that women peace builders face as a consequence of their work? And I guess these impacts can both be positive and negative.
Thank you, Stephanie. Even though both the impact can be positive and negative, let me raise some issues which can be more to address. So when I talk about peace and security, I always ask myself, peace and security for who? So if peace truly means stability, dignity, and safety, it must be for all humankind, not just for those in power, but for everyone. That means all humans should be meaningfully involved in peace work. However, in reality, women's participation in peace processes is still under threat. When we hear threat, many of us immediately think of violence. And yes, violence against women peace builders is very real and undeniable. Harassed, intimidated, and attacked, that never must be minimized. But I want to speak about another form of threat. One is quieter, but just as damaging. In my experience, women involved in peace building constantly have to prove their competence, their strength, and their legitimacy. They must work twice as hard to avoid being removed from their position or being stereotyped. They are often under pressure to demonstrate that they are strong enough to sit at the table. As a result, many women unconsciously begin to adapt to these norms, being tough, unemotional, aggressive, or dominant, the standard definition of strength. They feel the need to act like men in order to survive in peace and security spaces. But this constant performance can come at a cost. It can distance women from their own authentic leadership styles, their empathy, their relational approaches, and their lived experiences. It creates psychological pressure, an invisible duty to carry both the burden of representation and the fear of failure. Moreover, in some contexts, when I hear from the women group, women at the administration level, they're afraid to get married. Why? Because marriage can become a reason that often disguised as care. Its justification is formed as consent. Now you should focus on your family. So meanwhile, for men, marital status doesn't change. Whether they are married or not, their authority, credibility, and professional duty remain intact. Women are not only carrying the burden of conflict, they are carrying invisible psychological burdens. So the threat to women in peace processes is not only physical violence, it is also psychological suffering. It is the fear of being judged, the pressure to represent all women, the exhaustion of constantly proving one's worth, the silent anxiety of making one mistake and potentially reinforcing stereotypes. So if peace truly means stability, dignity, and safety, then it must be for all humankind.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Maybe Sarah, you want to comment on this as well?
Yes, thanks so much, Stephanie. It was very powerful what Agnes shared. So much of it resonated with me, and so much of it connects beautifully to some research that I'm going to share as part of this question. So both Esther and I are part of women mediators across the Commonwealth, which is one of the women mediator networks that spans the Commonwealth nations globally. So we're a very, very diverse network. And we were really interested in this question of psychosocial impact on women mediators and peace builders, because what we discovered is when people gathered for women, peace, and security conversations, we were rarely addressing this issue of psychosocial impact from the front table. And yet women were talking in the sidelines all the time around how deeply their work was impacting them. And so we wanted to really bring this conversation out into the light. So we worked with women from 6 global regions for this research, and it was really powerful and quite profound what the results showed. So the results showed that 96% of women mediators and peace builders who participated in the research were moderately to very impacted by their work. So really significant impact across the women who were participating. And what that really dialed down into was emotional impact was the most significant impact people noticed. They also noticed financial impact, often taking on work that was self-funded or doing work for free and that took away from paid work. So really feeling that financial stretch. Feeling mental impacts, forgetfulness, inability to think straight, difficulty managing their mental workload, relational impacts on relationships with family, with friends, with others, spiritual impact, and of course, physical impact, really noticing those signs of stress and distress in the body. What's interesting, though, is that the research also showed that 86% of women who participated reported that their behavior in a working context was either not impacted at all or only moderately impacted by this psychosocial burden. So in some ways, that's very encouraging. We see women doing really powerful work that's not inhibited by their psychosocial impact from that work. But the other side of that story is it means that women are carrying that burden alone. So often they're managing the psychosocial impact without much support. Interestingly, though, you talked about resilience factors, and I want to share several in conclusion. Women talked about all kinds of really interesting resilience factors that were kind of positive elements of being women in these spaces. So they talked about work as a balancing factor, how much they enjoyed their work, how much strength they gained from their role as women peace builders or mediators. They also talked about gender as a catalyst, that for some women, being a woman in some of these spaces that are very male dominated, sometimes being the only woman at the table, opened up space for them to work in a different way, and sometimes created some opportunities for them to really transform peace processes. Women also talk very powerfully about coping and self-care mechanisms that they've set up for themselves. And they talked about working with other women, how important it was when they had the opportunity to work with other women, to co-mediate, to co-facilitate in peace-building processes, how much that strengthened them. So we'll go into some of the details of some of the other things that came from the research related to what I've shared, but it was very, very clear that we had both very difficult psychosocial impacts and also some really resiliency-oriented factors for women mediators and peace builders globally.
Yeah, thank Sarah and Agnes again for these meaningful insights. And I think this is also a very important message that you have transmitted, that women both suffer from their engagement in peace processes psychosocially, but I guess also like face increased protection risks. But at the same time, we have some potential. They're building on their resilience and inner strength they show, making them even stronger and growing from the challenges they are facing when being engaged in peace processes. So I find this very amazing. And now we will set a bit a programming lens on what we have discussed so far, we have learned that sometimes through the very pathways through which women contribute to peace can also expose them to heightened psychosocial and protection risks. And this, of course, has to be considered in program design and implementation. And this is where it becomes urgent to apply a do no harm lens to our work, since every program affects like the context in which it operates, both intendedly but also unintendedly. And here I would like to hear from you, Erika and Esther, who have worked in many peacebuilding programs and were also included in the design of these peacebuilding programs. So from your experience, which program formats or engagement approaches are most likely to increase risks women peacebuilders face as a consequence of their work? And what are the key factors contributing to these unintended risks?
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie, for these questions. These are very important. I believe peacebuilding initiatives can unintentionally increase risk for women peacebuilders in several important ways. First, when we do not recognize that women peacebuilders are also survivors of armed conflict. Many women who participate in dialogue platforms, advocacy space, or representation process have experienced violence. Peace builders are not only leaders, they are also conflict-affected individuals. Ignoring this reality can deepen psychosocial harm. Second, when we work without a conscious gender analysis. Territories affected by armed conflict are also deeply affected by gender-based violence. I believe these two things are very close connecting, and unequal power relations. If our interventions do not integrate a gender perspective, we might unintentionally reinforce traditional rules instead of transforming them. Third, when we fail to recognize local knowledge, and I believe this is the most important, in many contexts, women have been building peace for years through informal mediation, humanitarian support, and community organization. Sometimes highlight technical interventions overlook these existing capacities and create parallel structures instead of strengthening that already exist. Our role should be build bridges and create opportunities to amplify local solutions, not replace them. And finally, when we do not use conflict-sensitive monitoring tools, if we only measure outputs like the number of workshops, of participants, we may miss rising tensions, backlash, or increased risks for women leaders. Monitoring must also assess perceived safety, social cohesion, and psychosocial well-being. This is my ideas about this. Thank you, Steffi.
Thank you, Erika. Esther, I would be very interested in hearing also your perspectives from this.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for this beautiful question, which calls for deeper analysis. One of the biggest risks is visibility without protection.
Mm-hmm.
In fragile environments like ours, where I find myself, when women are publicly profiled as case leaders without proper risk assessment, they can face serious backlash from political actors, community members, or even their own families. I have personally experienced threats and public attacks simply because I was advocating for dialogue. My own children were kidnapped, our humanitarian vehicles burned, attacked several times in my house. I had to relocate simply because then we did not know the use or the usefulness of proper risk analysis to ensure a proper do no harm when carrying out activities. And tokenism inclusion is another risk. When women are invited to high-level panels but not supported locally, they return home exposed. I remember I led a delegation of women and to have talks with actors. And when they came back, before they could go to their homes, they had serious threats. We had crosses and coffins, crosses drawn on coffins to show that when we come, that will be all about us. If communities are not engaged to legitimize their role, women may be accused of being politically aligned or externally driven. This was the case of the women peace mediators in my region. Short-term project cycles also create harm. Women are mobilized intensively, expected to transform communities, and then funding ends. This creates burnout and emotional exhaustion. In our work, we saw women mediators carrying trauma from listening to trauma from listening to violent stories every day. I am one of those. And then funding comes and ends. Truly, we didn't know what to do. So without structured psychosocial support, it becomes very, very difficult and dangerous for women mediators or women peace builders. Finally, I would say poorly facilitated dialogue spaces can re-traumatize women. Asking survivors to share experience publicly without trauma-informed approaches can reopen wounds. These unintended consequences often come from speed, pressure to show visibility, and insufficient local conflict analysis. If we want to protect women peace builders, we must treat them not as beneficiaries of projects, but as frontline actors operating in high-risk environments, like the environments where I find myself daily. This is what I have to say with regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I think both you and Erica gave already some really interesting, like the basis for what we can do in program design, implementation, also in program monitoring to protect women from this unintended harm. So what I've heard so far is trauma-informed facilitation, engaging with communities, and also build or really focus on locally led design and not exposing external ideas, build on what is there and the capacities for peace that already exist. Now the final question, and I guess also the most important one of today's session, which I would like to address to all of you, is, so from your experience, what strategies, programmatic approaches, or support mechanisms have proven to be effective in reducing the harms we have been talking about? And maybe also give us some insights on how they can be practically operationalized across the project cycle of future peace-building initiatives. It would be great to hear some really concrete examples from your contexts that other practitioners can build on when aiming to put on a psychosocial do no harm lens in their work. So who wants to jump in first?
I would say that I have 4 pathways, for strategies to reduce harm. The first one is that protection must be built into design, not added later, as we've seen lately. In our initiatives, before launching the Women Mediators Network, Community Women Mediators Network, we conducted informal and honest risk conversations. What could happen to us if we take this role? What support do we need? This should be the standard practice. Second, move from individual visibility to collective legitimacy. We work closely with traditional leaders and local authorities, so women mediators, so that we women mediators, we are not publicly endorsed. When chiefs and community leaders validate our role, the role of women, the women's roles, as I would say, backlashes decrease significantly. Number 3, a budget for well-being. Budget, call it budget for well-being. Psychosocial support, peer reflection spaces, and rest periods must be part of programming. Women cannot pour from an empty cup, as I'll put in our local parlance. In our experience, peer cycles among mediators reduce isolation and stress because we form a support system, as I always say. Then 4, ensure long-term accompaniment. Multi-year engagement builds resilience and trust. When funding is predictable, women are less vulnerable to political manipulation or economic pressure. Across the project cycle, design participatory risk assessment, and then stakeholders mapping, implementation, regular safety checks in and adaptive responses, monitoring, track unintended harms, not just output. Now, today in my own daily life, before I move out, I must first of all analyze my environment and the actors surrounding that environment. And what time do I have to leave and what time do I have to get into my house? The whole place, everybody knows that 6:30 does not meet me out of my house. I am a prisoner without a crime. People stay out till midnight, but I'm always, I'm always conscious about the precarity of the situation in which I find myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Who wants to build on this?
I'm happy to come in behind Esther because she's touched on quite a few important points that we raised in the research. And I want to focus on that because it really will amplify the voices of the women in our network. So a lot of collective thinking around this. So the women had 6 recommendations for psychosocial support that's needed in very practical ways. I'll keep it very brief, but it creates a really helpful framework, I think, that we could begin to implement within peacebuilding circles globally for supporting women. So the first recommendation was really mainstreaming psychosocial support. So raising this as a really key issue within the women, peace, and security agenda, really encouraging global peace building to look at how do we really assume that psychosocial support should be built into all of our structures. So in structures of funding, in structures of kind of mediation and peace building design, and in terms of follow-up. The second recommendation was that women were advocating for safe spaces and peer support. So women were saying, actually, that time to support each other, those really protected, well-facilitated spaces for us to connect about our work and to provide that support from the basis of that lived experience that we all share is really fundamental. So everything from regular check-in groups to retreats that were healing in nature. Women were saying peer support is really, it's something that's lacking for so many women and would be a hugely transformational support structure. The third recommendation was, and Esther really spoke to this, embedding trauma-informed awareness into all of our work and training. So women were saying, I know my work as a peace builder, I know my work as a mediator, but I don't necessarily know as much as I should about trauma. So when that shows up at the table, when that shows up in my work with communities, I'm not always sure how to manage that as a non-clinical professional. And so really encouraging us to think in very focused ways around how can we add trauma-informed training and resiliency-informed training into the work that we do in this space. The fourth recommendation was counseling and therapeutic support. And so people were saying that they really needed this in some cases, and that ideally it would be provided by people who have had a career or an experience of peace building or mediation globally, and that have retrained as counselors or trained as counselors so that women could have that degree of understanding in that therapeutic space. The fifth recommendation was advocacy and research. So that was really important for women, that we do more research into the ways that women peace builders are impacted, and that we use that research to really begin to advocate for this kind of structure of psychosocial support, or these frameworks of psychosocial support. Recommendation 7 was financial support. How do we make this all happen? It takes a lot of finance to be able to afford this, but really building that into pieces of peace building work that are funded by governments or INGOs, that the money to support these structural frameworks of support would be built in. And I'm going to finish and backtrack actually to recommendation 6, which was prevention. The women had some really brilliant ideas about very practically integrating prevention of risk into the way that we do peace building work. So the women were recommending that we develop conflict analysis and risk assessment frameworks that can be applied by women mediators and peace builders to evaluate kind of potential threats, risks, and negative impacts associated with specific contexts, so that we can really have our eyes wide open about the work that we're stepping into. We also recommended having pre and post deployment support. So not even just a debrief scenario, but a pre-brief scenario where women could anticipate what might be difficult in the field, and to kind of develop some support networks around what might take place, as well as safe and effective debriefing. And then finally, establishing systems to respond very quickly to threats that women were experiencing themselves, that women would have a place to turn very quickly to get support if they were experiencing threats or indeed impact in the field.
Thank you, Sarah. Agnes, I would like to turn to you, because I know that your organization also did counseling in this kind of area. We only have now 3 minutes left until we hop into the questions from the audience, but I would like to quickly ask you to share your experiences on what you have practically done in Myanmar.
Thank you, Esther and Sarah. Actually, most of my points which I want to highlight is already mentioned. So in terms of save the time, I just want to focus on the trauma-informed approach, which both of you already mentioned it, but I just want to highlight again, when we include the well-being support for women, yes, budget is always come as a barrier. I often hear like, no, not enough budget. And even when the women-led organization try to allocate the time and for the well-being session, the women who have to participate in those sessions are piles up with the other tasks. So they always priorities for the other meetings and the other agendas coming ahead before the well-being sessions. So we really have to encourage women. The encouragement is not just in the protocol or in the agenda as, okay, we have well-being sessions every month. No, we really encourage women to join it by giving time for them. Understanding when they are not giving priority for the some meeting because they have emotional support session, like well-being support session. Instead of in the organization, we have well-being support. Okay, they announce you can take individual sessions anytime. But if the women don't really have time for that, while they are occupied with other tasks in the organization, that is not practical, I think. So we really have to make the encouragement in action, which I want to highlight it. And also when we have to the procedure for report system, we really want to encourage women with the safety environment and safety support and the preparation. It's not only you can report it, but like as Sarah said, we need like encouraging them and preparing them their consent for safety. And then after reporting also, we have to close, monitor, and supporting, not just as you can do it. We already mentioned in the protocol, it is not enough. There are invisible lines and the tape we need to go through. So we really have to see it from, like Esther said, from the local, from your organization experience perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes, for this. And yeah, we will now turn to the questions that has been written by the audience. And there's one question that I was also already thinking of a lot as well. And here, that's the question regarding male engagement in this field of action. So the question is, as a program implementer, how male can support the peace building activities focused on the gender sensitiveness and psychosocial impact? And I would like to know the proper role and attitude of male in the field of this matter. And I think here we also have some interesting insights from Latin America, where there has been increasingly work focused on new masculinities and how to engage with men on women empowerment. So yeah, I would like to throw the question into the round. Who feels comfortable to answering this?
Let me
talk about, sorry. Let me talk about men's involvement in programs led by women. At first, it was very difficult to build that bridge because of our patriarchal system. But given the stakes and the local reality, when we came up to start advocating to have male ambassadors, the few who agreed to that concept pushed on that agenda solely to the chiefs and to some other people. And today, women have gained recognition in what they are doing, and we move along with the men whenever we are going to do work in community. It is about bridging those gaps, bridging the gaps also of inequality and those gaps on discriminatory practices in order to be together to carry out transformation and acceptance within the community. So today, even before the arrival of external people, you'll find the males, you'll find men and women working together. At first, it was the women who were going towards the men to convince them about buying the agenda. And once they bought it, it became so much easier. They will ask us to shift behind where we find difficulties, and they stand in front as a shield for protection. And they are the ones who advocate on our behalf that people should pay paying attention, because we have something of high importance to tell the communities, and especially during dialogue sessions. But the best of it all is that we do not just go and get men anyhow. We get what we call community entry points. And these are the men who serve as ambassadors, in dialogue spaces or wherever we go talking about peace building. Yeah, so we call them, these are the entry points, community entry points. Once we identify them, we sell the agenda to them, they agree to the mission, the objective, the goal of the action which we are carrying out in the community, then the rest become easier for community also to move along with us. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, thank you, Esther. And I think very closely linked to this question is also another question, which is how can we streamline women engagement in peace and security where cultural habits hinder them?
I'll just say a brief few words on this, Stephanie. I think it kind of ties in, I suppose, with the response that Esther just gave to that question. When we think about really integrating women into peace processes in areas where there might be those cultural barriers to women's participation, it's really important to work with men on that level as well. So a couple of the ways women were reported being most severely impacted when we were doing the research was being prevented from engaging in peace building by men. And often that was through kind of non-state armed groups. Sometimes that was by official governments and armies. But often the women were starting to take on roles that women in those societies don't always get a chance to do. And so there was huge pushback, not only against their work, but against them themselves. And Esther shared very powerfully how people have experienced threats against themselves, against their staff members, against their family members. Sometimes those threats are carried out and women have experienced kidnapping, or people that are very close to them have been kidnapped and they end up having to pay ransoms. So there's huge amounts of disruption around women being able to engage in parts of the world where maybe that's not as commonly done. And so I think it's really important that we look at supporting women in very practical ways in areas where women's voices need to be amplified within peace processes. And a lot of those recommendations are a part of that. So funding safe spaces for women to support each other, working with local men who are leaders in communities to really talk about the importance of women in these spaces, and to help women mitigate those risks. So when they are under threat, when they do experience risk, which we see all the time for women internationally, that we have that support structure set up so women can get that practical support to maybe be moved to a safer space, to be able to have protection when they're under threat. So I think there's a lot of practical ways we can begin to really amplify women's voices, because they are active. And, you know, so many parts of the world where women's voices aren't always integrated in society, we see women doing amazing peace building work. It's just often below the radar. So how can we create those support structures to help them get their heads above the parapet and to do that work openly and vibrantly?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sarah. I have a question for Erica from Colombia. So, Erica, based on your experience working on gender and peace building in Colombia, how much progress has actually been made in implementing the gender commitments of the peace agreement, particularly regarding the protection and rights of women and girls who were among the most affected by the conflict? It's a very big question. Let's see how you can give a very short answer to this.
Yes, don't worry, Steffi. Colombia had a difficult history connecting with conflict, armed conflict. In this moment, we are in transition process, but also the violence increase and the violence against women and girls increase. But I think the effort that civil women's organizations in Colombia for create politicals, for including in peace building process, for create specific measures in peace building process for addressing gender-based violence and also another rights for women are very important. And I believe we are in a difficult situation. We have a very, very interesting experience for including a gender approach for protecting gender rights. The civil society organizations in Colombia made a very important work, and also the government, but we are a difficult context connecting with conflict armed. I believe the most important thing is the reflection that the conflict armor is closely connecting with gender-based violence. The violence with women is increased by the conflict armor, but also it's a reason, no, I don't know, we need to create societies more equalities for create societies with more peace. If we don't have gender approach in peace building process, we lost the focus for work. And I believe this is very important. It's a difficult situation in Colombia, but I believe the work is done, and we had very good experience for sharing with another colleagues in the world, and create this kind of networks is very good too.
Thank you, Erica. I have one last question I guess we have time for, and that is addressed to Esther. So here it says, I heard Ms. Oman refer to the need to avoid re-traumatizing in reconciliation efforts. So we work on structural integration of MHPSS in accountability efforts to increase their impact for individual and community healing. So in your advocacy for doing no harm, duty of care, avoiding re-traumatization, does that reverberate? And what would help to get more traction for this?
Sorry.
Now we hear you. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Please come again. Can you come again with the question quickly, please? Thank you.
So here we refer to the re-traumatization in reconciliation effort. So the person that uttered the question said we work on structural integration of MHPSS and accountability efforts to increase their impact. So, for example, for individual and community healing. And in your advocacy for doing no harm, duty of care, and avoiding re-traumatization. So I guess how does this, what is your opinion on this, and what is your practical experience, and what would help to get more traction or also attraction to this?
The very first thing is that we empower. I don't like using the word training all the time. We empower our communities and the beneficiaries we work with, especially the survivors, to identify conflict-sensitive communication, to adopt what we call conflict-sensitive communication, to be impartial in all what they are doing. This we try to communicate this wherever we go. And then we identify support systems. We try to create support systems within the communities. We discover that we have a huge intergenerational gap. And when we talk about trauma-informed approaches, we must bridge these gaps so that one generation could trust the other in listening. And we also put in place we also put in place activities such as listening, information, and communication. So when you can, we just listen and listen and listen. And later on, we look for the appropriate information in the words which this should be used and pass it on. We communicate that to you. And then together, we come up with a plan of action on how to come out of it. This has been my own experience. So I will, before I say anything that will lead me, or when I listen to what people say and I get involved in conversation, I make sure that every word I use is analyzed, and I also educate the other people to use words which are affordable to me, you know. I talk in terms of like bargaining, buying. So I bargain that they should use those words which will be very appealing when having conversations with others or with me. And so we also identify, we put in place community useful groups. Like you have volunteers who become useful groups. When you have a problem, you can go to them, you know, you table your concern. If it's above them, they will know to which group or which person to refer to.
Okay, thank you, Esther.
And to end it, we also have what we call pooled communication. So we decide to go out as a group, and together we say it out together, all together. Whatsoever we have in us, we bring it out. Whether somebody is listening or not, we are just sharing and sharing and sharing. And then later on, we try to examine what we said and how the negatives could be transformed into something useful or positive. And then the negative, and then the positive, we ask everyone to keep on to that, And we came up with a user-friendly group. Sorry, that's what we call it. We came up with a user-friendly group where we say, let the woman speak. So when we come and meet, you just say what you have, which is disturbing you, how you feel, and everything, how you see, you know, we come up with at least some indicators of what we want to achieve. And then by the end of the day, we say, when we are coming next, we want to have a change. We want to see a change. Like myself, I never knew what self-care meant I was working 24 hours the clock. But because of such conversations in pool, useful groups, I was able to adjust, adapt, and today I can say, stop, let me go and find my care. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. And I'm very sad to announce that today's discussion has already come to an end. I think we have learned a lot, both on the roads, women as human peace processes, not only as human rights advocates, but also as survivors of gender-based violence and former participants of armed groups. And we have also learned how their participation makes peace processes actually more holistic and sustainable. We have also learned how this work can affect them psychosocially, but also from a protection perspective, putting immense stress on these women and also increasing, if there are no protection systems in place, the risk of gender-based violence and community rejection. So I'm very happy that we have come to some really concrete solutions on how we can avoid to do further harm when we engage with women peace builders, which means that we have to focus on localized approaches, set up prevention and security mechanisms, set up psychosocial support systems, which also means peer support and community support. And also engage with male actors on this topic and make it like a more openly discussed issue, not only among women, but within the entire communities. So thank you very much to the audience and also to our 4 very strong panelists today. I regret we had some more questions which we did not manage to raise now, but for those of you in the audience who would still like to ask your questions, you can send them to us from Berkhoff and I will forward them to the panelists. And also we will have a quick practice note set up as a result of this discussion, which we will also be sharing in the upcoming days. So thanks a lot, everyone, for this important and inspiring discussion around International Women's Day. And yeah, have a good rest of the morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you find yourself. And yeah, thank you so much for this.